What happened when an undercover CEO posed as a homeless veteran at a small-town truck stop will restore your faith in kindness. To all our incredible listeners, you're the kind of people who believe in doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Today's story is about quiet courage, working-class dignity, and the power of one simple act of compassion. When a humble cashier risked her job to help a stranger, she had no idea who he really was, or how that moment would change everything. Grab a warm drink. This is a story you won't want to miss. The sun had barely crested the frost-bitten hills of Montana when Cassie Bell flicked on the lights at Rustwood Truck Stop. The fluorescent hume filled the space as she moved behind the counter, her breath still visible in the morning chill that clung to the windows. Outside, snow from the night before blanketed the parking lot, muffling the crunch of tires and boots as the first truckers rolled in for their coffee, their conversations quiet and familiar. Cassie greeted them by name, her voice warm and steady, the same way she had every morning since she'd taken the job nearly a year ago. She loved the rhythm of it all, the hiss of the coffee pot, the clink of mugs, the soft country music humming from the wall-mounted radio. There was something sacred about being the first smile someone saw on the road. Inside the kitchen, Ben, the station's short-order cook, shuffled around in worn boots, cracking eggs with the precision of a man who'd done it for 40 years. Together they worked in unspoken sync, two gears in a machine powered by routine and shared purpose. But lately something has shifted. The station's new district manager, Tammy Crane, had arrived like a sudden storm, tight-lipped, always in heels too sharp for tile floors, clipboard in hand, watching like a hawk. She'd already cut hours, removed the community bulletin board, and scolded Cassie for excessive friendliness during transactions. Still, Cassie held firm to what she'd been raised to believe, that kindness didn't cost a dime, and that people on the road needed more than just fuel and fried eggs. They needed to feel human. Her father, a decorated Army vet, had taught her that decency wasn't a policy, it was a way of life. She thought about him often in the quiet moments before the day picked up, his old pocket knife still tucked in her bag, a reminder of who she was. As she wiped down the counter and poured the first cup of coffee, Cassie had no idea that today would test everything she believed about compassion, justice, and the quiet power of doing the right thing, especially when no one seemed to be watching. The jingle of the front door bell barely registered at first, buried under the hiss of the fryer and the hum of early morning chatter. Cassie looked up from refilling the creamers to see a man standing in the entryway, motionless, like he wasn't sure whether he should step inside. He wore a tattered army field jacket, faded from sun and snow, and clutched an old canvas duffel with both hands, like it carried everything he owned. His beard was patchy, his cheeks wind-burned, and the soles of his boots left melted trails on the rubber mat. He looked tired, not just physically, but soul-deep tired. Cassie recognized that kind of weariness. Her father used to wear it on long nights when the memories got too loud. She offered a smile that came easily, even on hard days. "Morning. You look like you could use something warm." The man nodded slowly, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm not looking for a handout," he said. "Just wondering if there's any work, dishes, snow shoveling, anything." Cassie's heart pinched. She glanced around. The morning rush was still thin, and Tammy wouldn't be in for another hour. "We're not hiring, officially," she said gently, "but I can get you a hot meal. Coffee, too." The man shook his head. "Can't pay. Just thought I'd ask." "Consider it credit," Cassie said, already reaching for a bowl and pouring a fresh cup. "You can pay it back when things turn around." She ladled out a steaming bowl of beef stew left over from last night's dinner crowd and slid it across the counter with a spoon and a biscuit. "Sit anywhere you like," she added. "Warm up." He hesitated for a moment, clearly unaccustomed to kindness, then sat at the corner booth. As he took his first sip of coffee, he looked up at her with misty eyes and whispered, "You just gave me more than food. You gave me my dignity." Cassie smiled, hiding the lump forming in her throat. She didn't know who he was or where he'd come from, but at that moment, he wasn't a stranger. He was just a man, cold and hungry, trying to hang on to a sliver of humanity in a world that often turned its back, and to her that was reason enough. The slam of high heels on linoleum cut through the quiet like a gunshot. Tammy Crane swept into the truck stop with her usual storm-front energy, pressed blazer, perfect hair, and a clipboard clutched like a gavel. Her eyes immediately locked onto the man in the corner booth, hunched over a half-eaten bowl of stew and a steaming mug. She didn't bother to greet anyone. "Cassie," she barked, already halfway behind the counter. "Why is that man eating without a receipt?" The warmth that had settled in the diner turned to ice. Cassie turned from the register, trying to keep her voice calm. "He was out in the cold, ma'am. He asked for work. I couldn't give him a job, so I gave him lunch." Tammy's eyes narrowed. "On whose authority?" "He's a veteran," Cassie said, gesturing gently toward the man's duffel and military jacket. "It's a bowl of stew and a cup of coffee. It costs us almost nothing." "That's not your call to make," Tammy snapped, loud enough for the nearby truckers to hear. "This isn't a charity, it's a business. And I don't care if he's a vet or the Pope. We don't give away food." The man stood up slowly, lifting his duffel like it weighed as much as his dignity. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, miss," he muttered to Cassie. "I'll be on my way." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. Tammy scoffed. "Put that away. We don't take guilt money from freeloaders." The words hung in the air like smoke. Cassie stepped between them, her voice sharper now. "That's enough, Tammy. He didn't ask for anything. I offered." Tammy crossed her arms. "Then you've just violated company policy. Theft, plain and simple." Cassie blinked, stunned. "You're calling this theft?" "I'm calling it cause for termination," Tammy said coldly, reaching out her hand. "Your name tag and apron. Now." The room fell deathly silent. Even the grill stopped sizzling. Cassie's hands shook as she untied her apron. Around her, truckers and co-workers looked on, some in shock, others in silent protest. Ben opened his mouth to speak, but Tammy cut him off with a glare. Cassie handed over her tag and apron, feeling like she'd been stripped of more than just a uniform. She gathered her coat, her bag, and walked to the door, the man trailing behind her. As it closed behind them, the warmth she'd created that morning evaporated, replaced by a bitter cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The wind stung Cassie's face as she stepped into the parking lot, her breath coming out in short, angry bursts. The morning sun was still low, casting long shadows over the snow-dusted asphalt. She walked a few paces, not really sure where she was headed. Just away. Behind her, the door creaked open. Again, "Miss," came a voice, quiet and steady. She turned to see the man she'd just fed jogging to catch up, his duffel slung over one shoulder. In his gloved hand he held something small and silver. "You dropped this," he said, extending it toward her. Cassie's eyes widened as she took it. The worn metal cover of her father's pocket knife gleamed faintly in the morning light. The initials JRRB were still engraved on the side, just like the day he gave it to her before his last deployment. She hadn't even realized she'd lost it in the commotion. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking a little. This means a lot." The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "You take care of people. That matters." He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a weathered black notebook. "What was her name? The manager?" Cassie frowned. "Tammy Crane. Why?" The man scribbled something with a pen that looked oddly expensive for someone in worn boots. "Just something I keep track of," he replied vaguely, tucking the notebook away. Cassie tilted her head, suspicion beginning to rise beneath her confusion. "Why are you really asking?" He offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "Let's just say some people still believe how others treat strangers says everything about who they are." Cassie was quiet, watching him as he adjusted his coat and prepared to walk away. "Who are you?" she asked softly. He paused just for a moment before replying, "Someone who pays attention." With that, he turned and walked off down the snowy sidewalk, fading into the early morning mist, like he'd never been there at all. Cassie stood in place, clutching the pocket knife, heart pounding with something she couldn't quite name. Grief, anger, confusion, maybe even hope. Something about that man didn't sit right. Not in a dangerous way, but in a way that made her feel like what had just happened wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Back inside Rustwood Truck Stop, the tension lingered like the smell of overcooked bacon. Tammy Crane stood behind the counter, barking orders at Ben and Maggie with renewed confidence, her voice louder than usual, as if punishing everyone for having witnessed what she called unnecessary disciplinary action. She wore her authority like a badge, straightening napkin dispensers and checking expiration dates with exaggerated precision. The diners had quieted, watching from behind their mugs, some whispering, others just shaking their heads. It wasn't long before the bell above the door chimed again. Heads turned. The man from earlier stepped back inside, but something had changed. Gone was the unsure shuffle, the bowed posture. He moved with a quiet confidence now, shoulders squared, eyes sharp and focused. He approached the counter slowly. "Miss Crane," he said calmly. Tammy, who had turned back to the kitchen, froze mid-step. "I thought I made myself clear," she snapped, spinning around. "You're not welcome here." The man ignored the comment and pulled the same worn notebook from his coat. "Just a few questions," he said, pen already in hand. "How long have you been managing this location?" Tammy blinked, momentarily thrown off. "That's none of your business." "Are personnel terminations made solely at your discretion?" he pressed. Tammy glanced around, now visibly agitated. "Who are you with? Some kind of inspector?" She let out a strained laugh. "You got a badge in that coat too?" The stranger didn't flinch. "Let's just say I report directly to the person who signs your checks." The air in the diner seemed to shift. Ben's hand stilled over the grill. Maggie slowly turned from the coffee station. Tammy's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" he replied, jotting down a note. "Because from what I've heard so far, your definition of leadership is scaring employees into silence and humiliating customers who don't meet your standards." Tammy crossed her arms. "I don't have to answer you." "No," he said evenly, closing the notebook, "but you will to the man who owns this place." With that, he turned and left again, the bell chiming softly behind him. The silence he left in his wake was louder than anything Tammy could say. Ben looked at Maggie. "Did you see the way he stood? That wasn't some random drifter." Maggie nodded. "Nope, that man was somebody." 20 minutes later, the hum of the truck stop was interrupted once again, but this time by the low growl of a diesel engine pulling into the lot. A deep blue pickup, clean and gleaming, rolled to a smooth stop outside the front doors. From it stepped a tall man in his early 70s, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, with a weathered cowboy hat and a long wool coat that flapped slightly in the wind. Harlan Stone didn't need to announce who he was. Those who'd worked at Rustwood long enough knew the man on sight. The Vietnam vet turned entrepreneur had built the Rustwood truck stop chain from a single gas station and hadn't set foot in this location in over 2 years. So when he walked in, the bell's cheerful chime clashed jarringly with the sudden tension that swept the room. Tammy Crane's face shifted into a frozen smile before he even made it to the counter. "Mr. Stone, what a surprise. We weren't expecting Cassie." "Where's Cassie Bell?" Harlan interrupted. His voice calm but firm. His eyes didn't flinch, scanning the room with quiet authority. Tammy hesitated, then straightened her blazer. "I had to let her go this morning," she said crisply. "Unfortunately, she gave away food to a transient without permission. It was a clear violation of policy." Harlan raised an eyebrow. "Policy, huh?" He turned to Ben and Maggie, who stood frozen near the kitchen. "That sounds about right to you?" Ben opened his mouth, then closed it again. Maggie stepped forward first. "Sir, Cassie gave a bowl of stew and a coffee to a man who looked like he hadn't eaten in days." "He didn't ask for anything," she offered. "It wasn't theft, it was kind." Harlan nodded slowly, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone. "Let me tell you a little about that man." He tapped the screen a few times, pulled up a text message, and turned it toward Tam. The screen read, "You were right about this location, Harlan. She fired the girl, called me a freeloader. I've got it all documented. Gus." Tammy's color drained as she read the name. Harlan met her eyes. "Gus Riley's been my best friend for 40 years. He's the man you tossed out, and thanks to him, I know everything I need to know about what's going on here." The truck stop felt like a courtroom now, and Harlan Stone stood at its center like a quiet, deliberate judge. He slipped his phone back into his coat and turned to Tammy, whose face had gone pale. "I didn't come here to talk about soup," he said, voice low but cutting. "I came here because for months I've been hearing things about this location. High turnover, complaints, a drop in morale, good employees quitting with no notice, customers saying the atmosphere changed." He pulled a thick envelope from his inside pocket and laid it flat on the counter. This is a collection of reports and employee statements from the past 6 months. Every one of them is about you, Tammy." Tammy's lips parted. "Sir, with all due respect, those are exaggerations. People don't like change. I've improved profitability here by double digits. That's measurable." Harlan stared at her, unimpressed. "Profit doesn't excuse abuse." He opened the envelope and began laying out pages. Printed emails, time card screenshots, complaint summaries, making staff clock out for bathroom breaks, cutting hours for anyone who questioned you, deleting time from pay periods, threatening to fire employees who called in sick, one of whom had a doctor's note and a 102-degree fever. Ben and Maggie both nodded solemnly, and a few more staff members quietly emerged from the kitchen to listen. Tammy's voice trembled now. "That's just one side of the story, and I heard it from 10 different people," Harlan countered. "The same story, different voices. Then today, you fired an employee not for failing to do her job, but for doing what I've always expected my people to do, treat others with decency." The room was silent, save for the low hum of the coffee warmer and the ticking of the wall clock. "You humiliated a veteran, you demeaned an employee in front of customers, and then you lied to me about it." Tammy opened her mouth again, but Harlan held up his hand. "We're done here." He turned to a man near the door, quiet until now, wearing a badge on his belt beneath his coat. "This is Officer Dale. He'll escort you to collect your belongings. After that, you'll hand over your keys and leave the premises immediately." Tammy's composure finally cracked. "You're firing me?" Harlan nodded once. "Effective now. There's no place for cruelty at Rustwood." As the officer stepped forward, Tammy looked around the room, searching for support, finding none. The staff turned away. No one followed her with their eyes as she disappeared into the back. The door swinging shut behind her felt like justice. Cassie stood just outside the truck stop's front doors, having arrived at Ben's request, still unsure why she was there or what to expect. The sting of her firing earlier that morning hadn't dulled, and part of her had almost turned around halfway through the parking lot. But when the door opened and Harlan Stone himself stepped out to greet her, offering a warm nod and extending a hand, her hesitation gave way to stunned disbelief. "Cassie Bell," he said with quiet conviction, "I owe you an apology, and something more than that." He led her inside, where the staff had gathered around the counter, eyes bright with something they hadn't felt in weeks: hope. "You didn't just do the right thing," Harlan continued, his voice carrying weight. "You did the human thing, and that's the kind of leadership we need more of around here." Cassie looked around at her coworkers, Ben, Maggie, even the truckers who'd stayed through the whole ordeal, and saw only support in their faces. "I'm just a cashier," she said softly. "You're a leader," Harlan corrected, "and I'd like to offer you a promotion to shift supervisor, effective immediately." A murmur of surprise passed through the room. "Better pay, more responsibility, and full authority to handle situations like the one you faced this morning, with empathy and discretion." Before she could respond, another figure stepped forward from the far booth. Gus Riley, clean-shaven, no longer hiding behind the weather-worn disguise, smiled as he approached. "You didn't know who I was," he said gently, "but you saw a man in need and treated him like a human being. That doesn't go unnoticed." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small token, a military patch, faded but clearly preserved. "This belonged to my brother. He always said people like you were the reason he made it home." Cassie stared at the patch, speechless. Her throat tightened as the weight of the moment settled in. She looked at Harlan, who smiled. "Say yes, Cassie. We're building something better here, and it starts with you." Blinking away tears, Cassie straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and nodded. "Yes, sir. I'd be proud too." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was sincere, and for the first time all day, Cassie felt like she was exactly where she belonged. In the weeks that followed, Rustwood Truck Stop transformed from a tense, rule-bound workplace into the kind of place Harlan Stone had always envisioned, a refuge for the road-weary and a second home for its employees. Cassie, now wearing a shift supervisor badge that still felt surreal on her chest, embraced her new role with quiet determination. Gone were the rigid schedules and silent resentment. In their place, Cassie worked with each employee to balance hours with their family needs, school classes, or medical concerns, something no one had dared request under Tammy's reign. The bulletin board was back up, now filled with hand-drawn thank you notes from local drivers and flyers for church dinners, mechanic referrals, and even a missing cat poster. But the most popular feature was the new Pay It Forward wall, with a register, a chalkboard with tally marks representing meals and coffees prepaid by customers for anyone who needed them, no questions asked. Word spread quickly. Truckers made a point to swing through Rustwood, even if it was a few miles off route. A young mother passing through with her toddler asked if she could pin up a thank you note after a stranger covered her breakfast. Cassie said yes, and watched as the note became the first of many in what became a gratitude corner. Gus Riley visited once a week, always in jeans and a windbreaker now, chatting quietly with Cassie and checking in on the staff like an unofficial morale officer. He'd started a small outreach program for homeless vets, and Rustwood had pledged to hire from that pool first whenever there was an opening. Ben and Maggie still ran the grill and register like a well-oiled machine, but now with a kind of lightness that hadn't been there before. There was still work to do, of course, fridges to clean, trucks to refuel, bills to pay, but it was done with a shared sense of pride. Rustwood wasn't just a place to work anymore. It was a place that made people feel seen. And as Cassie stood by the counter one snowy afternoon, watching a stranger add 2 more tallies to the chalkboard with a quiet smile, she realized that the heart of the place had come back to life. The wind howled outside as another Montana snowstorm rolled in, covering the highway in a soft, white hush. Inside Rustwood Truck Stop, the coffee pots bubbled and the fryers sizzled, but it was the quiet warmth of shared humanity that filled the air. Cassie stood behind the counter, scanning the room, not with the stress of a manager checking performance, but with the steady calm of someone who had helped rebuild something worth protecting. Truckers chatted with locals over breakfast. A teenager pinned a note of thanks to the bulletin board, and Maggie laughed as Ben tried to teach the new hire how to flip pancakes without launching them. Cassie smiled. This was what her father used to call good work. Not just punching a clock, but creating a place where people mattered. The bell above the door jingled. A man stepped in, soaked and shivering, his coat threadbare and boots caked in slush. He paused, eyes scanning the room, unsure whether he belonged. Cassie didn't hesitate. She grabbed a clean mug, filled it with hot coffee, and walked toward him. "Hey there," she said with a smile. "Rough out, huh? Come warm up. First cup's in the house." The man blinked, surprised, nodding slowly as he followed her to a booth. No fuss, no forms, no judgment, just warmth. As she returned to the counter, Gus sat quietly at the far end, sipping from a chipped ceramic mug, watching the scene unfold. He caught Cassie's eye and offered a subtle nod, part approval, part pride. Harlan had said once, "Leadership isn't about power, it's about example." Cassie finally understood what that meant. She reached into her pocket, thumbed the smooth metal of her father's pocket knife, and thought about the morning it all changed. One bowl of soup, one simple act of kindness. That's all it took to set a ripple in motion. She glanced at the chalkboard tally beside the register. Over 300 meals paid forward since that day, some by regulars, some by strangers just passing through. Cassie breathed in the scent of fresh coffee and snow-damp coats and felt the quiet power of it all. A truck stop wasn't supposed to be a place of miracles, but sometimes it only takes one small act to remind people of their humanity and to change everything. The story of Cassie Bell at Rustwood Truck Stop teaches us that true leadership and integrity aren't defined by title or policy, but by compassion, courage, and doing the right thing when no one's watching. In a world that often prioritizes profit, image, and efficiency, Cassie's small act of kindness, a bowl of soup and a cup of coffee, became a powerful symbol of dignity and empathy. Her willingness to help someone in need, even at personal cost, not only revealed her character, but also sparked a transformation that reached far beyond her. The story reminds us that one person can make a difference, even in a system that seems too rigid or cold to change. It also affirms the importance of creating workplaces and communities where kindness is valued, not punished. Through Cassie's journey, from cashier to respected leader, we learn that real success lies in how we treat others, especially the most vulnerable among us, and that sometimes it takes just one quiet, decent act to reignite the heart of a place and inspire a better future for everyone who walks through its doors.